Please close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the distinct, sharp smell of dark rye bread rubbing against a fresh clove of garlic. Or perhaps recall the loud, satisfying hiss of cold macaroni hitting a hot cast-iron pan on a lazy Sunday morning. Welcome back, my dear friends. Today we are taking a slow, comforting journey back to the 1970s and 1980s in Russia. We are going to remember 20 simple, cheap foods we ate when our pockets were completely empty, but our lives felt incredibly full. Today, some of these snacks might seem unimaginable to the younger generation, but to us, they taste like pure, unadulterated happiness. Make sure to stay with me until the very end, because the final memory on our list is a tea ritual so deeply touching, it will undoubtedly bring a warm tear of nostalgia to your eyes. Before we open the door to our retro kitchen, let us pause and remember how time itself used to flow back then. It moved slower, without the frantic rushing of the modern world. Waiting for a simple pot of potatoes to boil was not an inconvenience. It was a moment to sit, to talk, and to simply be together. There is a common myth today that because we lacked modern technologies, endless grocery store aisles, and money, our lives were somehow poorer or emotionally deprived. But you and I know the absolute truth. Life was vastly richer in sincerity and genuine connection. When you had almost nothing in the cupboard, preparing a snack became an act of deep creativity and love. Sharing a single piece of salted bread with a neighborhood friend forged a bond stronger than steel. We did not need expensive delicacies to feel joy. The true magic of our era was our profound ability to turn the most basic, inexpensive ingredients into a royal feast, through the sheer power of imagination and togetherness. Let us begin our journey with a true masterpiece of survival and ingenuity. A simple slice of black bread with oil and salt. Imagine running into the house after hours of playing outside in the courtyard, your cheeks red from the cold air, your knees scraped, but your heart completely full. You were incredibly hungry, but there was no time to wait for a proper dinner. Your mother would take a dense, heavy loaf of dark rye bread and carefully cut a thick slice. Then she would take a glass bottle of unrefined sunflower oil, the dark, fragrant kind that smelled vividly of roasted seeds and late summer days. She poured a thick, golden stream over the porous bread, letting it soak deep into the crumb. Finally, a generous pinch of coarse gray salt was sprinkled on top. That was all it took. You grabbed this treasure and ran back out to the staircase or the yard to share it with your friends. The rich oil dripped down your small fingers. The coarse salt crunched wonderfully against your teeth, and the tangy taste of the rye bread perfectly balanced the heavy oil. We had no money for fancy snacks, but in that moment, sitting on a wooden bench eating bread and salt, we felt like the absolute rulers of our small, happy world. Now, let us turn our memories to the sweeter side of our childhood, to a treat that cost absolutely nothing, but tasted like pure magic. Do you remember taking a fresh slice of soft white bread, the kind we fondly called a bâton? You would hold it carefully in your hand and sprinkle just a few drops of tap water over its porous, fluffy surface. The water was a crucial secret, acting as a gentle glue for what came next. Then, you would reach into the heavy glass sugar bowl and generously sprinkle granulated sugar over the damp bread. The white sugar crystals would stick to the wet surface, forming a thick, sparkling crust that caught the warm light of the kitchen lamp. The first bite was simply unforgettable. You would feel the soft, yielding texture of the fresh bread, followed immediately by the loud, satisfying crunch of the sugar crystals between your teeth. It was a brilliant symphony of simple textures. We would run out into the warm summer evening, our hands sticky and sweet, holding this makeshift cake like a precious treasure. We did not need expensive pastries or chocolate bars, because this sugary bread gave us all the energy and joy we needed to play outside until the streetlights finally flickered on in the gathering dusk. Let us step back into the cozy warmth of a cramped kitchen to remember the humble potato boiled in its jacket. When the days grew shorter and the autumn chill seeped through the window frames, there was nothing more comforting than a steaming enameled pot sitting quietly on the stove. We boiled the potatoes whole, leaving their thin, earthy skins perfectly intact. The ritual of eating them was a true test of patience. You would pull a piping hot potato from the pot, tossing it quickly between your hands, burning your fingertips just a little as you desperately tried to peel away the dark skin. The steam rising from the golden flesh smelled exactly like the earth and the harvest. We did not need rich sauces or fancy gravies. We simply poured a small mound of coarse salt onto a piece of old newspaper, dipped the hot potato directly into it, and took a bite. Sometimes, if we were lucky, we would eat it alongside a pungent slice of salted herring or a crunchy pickled cucumber from a glass jar. Sitting around the small kitchen table with family, peeling hot potatoes in comfortable silence, we shared a deep sense of security and warmth that no amount of money could ever buy. Moving forward, we simply must talk about the glorious transformation of the famous doctor's sausage in a hot frying pan. Buying a thick ring of this pale pink, bologna-style sausage was a staple of our weekly grocery runs, but eating it cold was only half the story. The real magic happened when you cut thick, round slices and threw them into a sizzling cast-iron pan. The heavy pan would hiss loudly, and the smell of savory fat would instantly fill the entire apartment. As the meat fried, something wonderful and slightly comical would happen. The edges of the sausage slices would begin to curl upwards, transforming the flat circles into little pink bowls. We would fry them until the bottoms developed a dark, crispy, golden brown crust. Eating these little meat cups with a fresh slice of dark bread was a true celebration. The contrast between the crunchy, fried bottom and the soft, meaty center was culinary perfection. It was a cheap, quick meal, often prepared by a tired mother after a long day at the factory. Yet to us children, a plate of curled fried sausage felt like a luxurious feast in our modest, cozy homes. Let us sweeten our memories once again by recording the delicate art of making homemade sugar candies on the kitchen stove. When a craving for something sweet struck, but the cupboards were bare and the purse was empty, we became little alchemists. You would take an ordinary aluminum tablespoon and fill it to the brim with plain white granulated sugar. Then you would carefully hold it directly over the open blue flame of the gas burner. Slowly, the white crystals would begin to melt at the edges, bubbling and turning a beautiful, rich shade of amber. The smell of burnt caramel would waft through the air, intoxicating and warm. Before the liquid sugar could harden, you had to quickly drop a simple wooden matchstick with the sulfur head snapped off right into the center of the spoon to act as a handle. As it cooled, the candy would solidify into a hard, translucent jewel. We called them cockerels, or petushki, popping that homemade lollipop into your mouth, feeling its slightly sharp edges against your tongue, and tasting the deep, smoky sweetness of caramelized sugar, was a quiet moment of pure childhood triumph. And now let us remember a snack that was as much a medicine as it was a delicious treat, the beloved garlic bread crust. Whenever a fresh, warm loaf of dark rye bread was brought home from the bakery, a fierce but friendly battle would ensue over who got to eat the end piece. The crusty, chewy heel we called the gorbushka. But we did not eat it plain. Oh no, we had a very specific, deeply ingrained ritual. You would peel a fresh, pungent clove of raw garlic. Then, holding the sturdy crust in one hand, you would vigorously rub the raw garlic across the rough, porous surface of the dark bread. The rough crust acted like a natural grater, carrying the garlic clove down until the intense, spicy oils melted completely into the bread. We would sprinkle a little salt on top and bite into it with immense satisfaction. It was sharp, it was incredibly spicy, and it left your breath smelling strongly for hours. Our grandmothers swore it was the ultimate defense against the harsh winter colds and the flu. Eating that fiery, fragrant crust was a badge of honor, a spicy rite of passage in every Soviet childhood. Next on our nostalgic journey is a small, iconic red tin can that saved countless dinners and accompanied millions on weekend fishing trips. I am talking, of course, about the legendary Sprats in tomato sauce. It was the quintessential cheap canned food, always available, always affordable, and packed with an incredibly bold flavor. Opening that flat, slightly dented tin required a heavy, dull metal can opener and a bit of elbow grease. As the lid peeled back, you were greeted by the rich, metallic, tangy aroma of sweet tomato sauce, mixed with the distinct smell of small fish. The ritual of eating it was delightfully messy and straightforward. You would take a simple aluminum fork, mash the little fish directly in the tin so they blended perfectly with the thick red sauce, and scoop a generous portion onto a thick slice of black bread. The sauce would invariably drip onto your fingers, staining them a faint orange color. We ate this humble fish spread standing in the kitchen, sitting on trains or camping by a quiet river. It was simple sustenance, but its unique, tangy taste is permanently etched into the flavor profile of our youth. Let us gently transition to the quiet mornings of our childhood, dominated by a deep plate of hot semolina porridge. For many, this dish was a complex relationship, but when prepared with love, it was a masterpiece of frugal cooking. Mother would stand patiently over the stove, continuously whisking the fine white grains into boiling milk to prevent those dreaded chewy lumps from forming. When it was finally ready, it was poured into a wide, shallow bowl, a smooth, creamy expanse of warm comfort. But the real magic was in the garnish. Because butter was often a luxury used sparingly, we would carefully place a single, tiny spoonful of bright red, homemade strawberry or raspberry jam right in the center of the white porridge. It looked like a beautiful little island of sweetness. The ritual was to eat it from the outer edges, where the porridge cooled the fastest, slowly and deliberately swirling the sweet, fruity jam into the warm, milky base with your spoon. That warm bowl of semolina grounded us, providing the gentle, steady energy we needed to face a long day at school. Continuing with the theme of simple, homemade sweets, let us recall a drink that felt like a decadent dessert, the famous whipped egg and sugar treat. We knew it affectionately as gogol-mogol, when your throat was feeling scratchy, or simply when you begged for something sweet after dinner. Grandmother would take a fresh, raw egg and crack it into a sturdy porcelain mug. She would add a few heaping spoons of precious white sugar, and then the rhythmic magic began. Clink, clink, clink. The sound of the metal teaspoon, rapidly beating the mixture against the sides of the mug, echoed through the apartment. You had to whip it by hand for what felt like hours, until the yellow yolk and the sugar completely transformed into a pale, thick, frothy cream that stood in soft peaks. The texture was incredibly smooth, almost like a melted marshmallow, and it coated the back of the spoon beautifully. Drinking, or rather scooping, that incredibly rich, sweet, velvety mixture out of the mug felt like a secret indulgence, a brilliant testament to how we created absolute culinary luxury from just two basic ingredients. We must also pay our respects to the tiny, foil-wrapped square that was a staple in every refrigerator, the classic processed cheese block. Wrapped in its iconic silver foil with bright retro lettering, this little block of cheese was a symbol of accessible, everyday nourishment. Peeling back the thin foil revealed a dense, slightly sticky, pale yellow square that smelled faintly of salt and dairy. It was incredibly versatile. Sometimes, when hunger struck fiercely after school, we would just peel it halfway down and bite directly into the block, savoring its dense, creamy, slightly sharp flavor. Other times, it was the secret weapon in our mother's kitchen arsenal. She would grate the cheese block into a pot of simple, boiling water with a few potatoes and carrots. As the cheese magically melted away, it transformed the clear, watery broth into a rich, cloudy, hearty soup that warmed you right down to your toes. That small square of processed cheese proved that you did not need expensive cuts of meat to make a dinner that felt deeply satisfying and wonderfully rich. Let us step outside the kitchen for a moment and remember a food that was essentially the social currency of our youth: roasted sunflower seeds. Buying seeds was not just a transaction. It was a cherished street ritual. You would find a kind-faced, elderly woman, a babushka, sitting on a small wooden crate near the bustling bus stop or outside the cinema. In front of her sat a large burlap sack filled with hot, freshly roasted black seeds. For just a few kopecks, she would use a small glass measuring cup to scoop out the seeds and pour them into a cone she had expertly twisted from a page of yesterday's newspaper. The warm cone felt like a small heater in your pocket during the winter. Eating them was a rhythmic, almost meditative act. Crack, spit, chew. The sound of cracking shells with your front teeth was the background noise to every deep conversation, every neighborhood gossip session, and every first date on a park bench. We shared those paper cones with our best friends, passing them back and forth until our fingers were stained dark from the roasted shells, united by the simple joy of the seed. Now let us bring our focus back to the stove to celebrate the art of giving yesterday's food a glorious second life. I am talking about the sheer joy of fried leftover macaroni. In our households, absolutely nothing was ever thrown away. If there was a bowl of cold boiled pasta stuck together in a firm block from the night before, it was destined for greatness. You would drop a dollop of margarine or butter into a hot pan and throw the clump of cold pasta right in. As it fried, you would break it apart with a wooden spatula. The transformation was incredible. Some pieces of the macaroni would remain soft and chewy, while others, the ones touching the hot metal, would blister and turn golden brown, becoming incredibly hard and crispy. The smell of toasted pasta and sizzling butter was absolutely intoxicating. The contrast in textures, the soft, yielding noodles against the hard, crunchy, buttery edges, made this cheap leftover dish wildly superior to the original meal. It was a rustic, unpretentious comfort food that filled our stomachs and our hearts. As we continue to explore the ingenuity of our mothers and grandmothers, we must remember a dessert born directly from the dark, cool depths of the root cellar. When fresh fruits were scarce or simply too expensive, we relied on the humble carrot to satisfy our sweet tooth. Do you remember the loud, rhythmic scraping sound of the heavy metal grater echoing in the kitchen? Mother would take 2 bright orange, crisp carrots and grate them into fine, juicy ribbons. She would place them into a beautiful, heavy crystal bowl, a stark contrast to the humble vegetable itself. Then she would fold in a generous spoonful of thick, slightly sour cream and sprinkle a layer of white sugar over the top. The sugar would slowly dissolve into the damp carrots and sour cream, creating a sweet, tangy, milky dressing. Eating that bright orange salad was wonderfully refreshing. It was incredibly crunchy, perfectly sweet, and slightly tart all at once. It was a simple, vitamin-rich treat that proved that elegance and deliciousness could be found in the cheapest vegetables pulled straight from the winter earth. Let us delve into a memory of absolute comfort, a dish that was often served when the evening was long, the money was gone, and the belly needed warming. We called it turya, though many just knew it as bread crumbled in milk. It was the ultimate, effortless supper. You would take a deep, wide bowl and pour in a generous amount of milk. Sometimes the milk was icy cold, straight from the glass bottle, and sometimes it was gently warmed on the stove until it steamed. Then you would take a piece of bread, perhaps a slightly stale white roll, or even a slice of dense black bread, and tear it into large, uneven chunks directly into the bowl. You would sprinkle a little sugar over the top and use your spoon to push the floating bread down, forcing it to absorb the sweet, milky liquid. The bread would become heavy, swollen, and delightfully soggy. Eating it felt like receiving a warm hug from the inside. It was mushy, sweet, and profoundly soothing, a dish that instantly made you feel safe, loved, and completely ready to drift off to a peaceful sleep in your small bed. Next, let us remember a snack that was won through patience and perfectly timed hovering in the kitchen. When Mother was preparing a massive pot of borscht or chopping vegetables for the winter pickling season, a large pale green head of cabbage sat like a prize on the cutting board. We children would linger nearby, watching her sharp knife slice through the crisp leaves, waiting for one specific prize. We were waiting for the kocherishka, the thick, pale, solid core of the cabbage stalk. Once all the useful leaves were stripped away, Mother would carve out the hard center and hand it to us. We would gnaw on it just like a fresh apple. The texture was incredibly dense and satisfyingly crunchy. It tasted earthy, slightly spicy like a mild radish, yet possessed a surprising watery sweetness that was deeply refreshing. Fighting playfully with your siblings over who got the largest piece of the cabbage stalk was a standard family ritual. It was a zero-cost snack that taught us to appreciate every single part of the food we were given, finding joy in the very core of the vegetable. And how could we possibly forget the large glass jars fermenting quietly on the sunny windowsills of our youth? Making homemade bread kvass was not just cooking. It was a vital domestic ritual. Stale bread was treated with utmost respect, never thrown in the trash. We collected the leftover crusts and pieces of rye bread, placing them on a metal baking sheet in the oven until they became rock hard and completely blackened at the edges. These charred pieces were then tossed into a massive 3-liter glass jar, submerged in warm water, mixed with sugar and a tiny bit of yeast, and left in the sun to work its magic. Over a few days, the water turned dark brown, and the yeasty, slightly sour, delightfully sweet aroma of fermentation filled the kitchen. Straining that cold, fizzy, dark liquid into a glass on a sweltering July afternoon was pure bliss. It was sharply carbonated, deeply refreshing, and carried the complex, toasted flavor of the burnt rye bread. That homemade kvass quenched our thirst far better than any modern, artificial soda ever could. Let us turn our attention to the improvised pastries that graced our tables when guests arrived unexpectedly, or when we simply longed for a cake we could not afford. We became masters of the cookie sandwich. You would take 2 perfectly square, crumbly shortbread cookies, the classic ones with scalloped edges that smelled warmly of baked flour and vanilla. Then you would take a knife and spread a thick, generous layer of cold, yellow butter onto one of the cookies. You pressed the second cookie firmly on top until the cold butter began to squeeze out slightly from the sides. That was the entire recipe, but the result was extraordinary. When you took a bite, the dry, crumbly texture of the sweet cookie would instantly mix with the rich, dense, creamy coldness of the butter, melting together in your mouth to create a sensation identical to a rich, expensive cake. We always ate these buttery sandwiches with a cup of very hot, strong black tea, letting the hot liquid wash away the rich butter. It was a testament to how 2 cheap ingredients could create an experience of pure indulgence. Now let us remember a sweet treat that came with a genuine thrill of danger and hours of excruciating anticipation. I am talking about boiling a tin of sweet condensed milk to make thick caramel. Buying a blue and white tin of regular condensed milk was a treat, but boiling it transformed it into a legendary dessert. The ritual required intense commitment. You placed the sealed metal can into a deep pot of water on the stove and let it boil for 3 long hours. The danger was real. If you forgot to add more water and the pot boiled dry, the pressurized can would violently explode, painting the kitchen ceiling with hot, sticky caramel. We watched that pot like hawks. Finally, after it had cooled down, you would puncture the lid. Inside, the runny white milk had magically transformed into a thick, sticky, dark brown caramel that smelled like toasted sugar and heaven. We would sit around the table, dipping our teaspoons directly into the jagged opening of the tin, closing our eyes as the rich, incredibly sweet, sticky paste dissolved on our tongues. It was the absolute pinnacle of homemade Soviet desserts. As we near the end of our list, let us remember the stark, beautiful contrast of winter dining. When the snow piled high outside the frozen windows, we relied heavily on the jars of vegetables we had painstakingly preserved during the brief, bright summer. There was no greater joy than the sharp pop of a metal lid coming off a large glass jar of homemade pickled cucumbers. The sharp, tangy scent of vinegar, pungent garlic, and fragrant dill umbrellas immediately filled the stale winter air of the kitchen. We would pull a cold, bumpy cucumber from the icy brine. We served it alongside a plate of steaming, hot, floury, boiled potatoes. The culinary magic lay entirely in the severe contrast. You would take a bite of the hot, bland, comforting potato, and immediately follow it with a loud, aggressive crunch of the icy, sour, incredibly flavorful cucumber. The hot and the cold, the bland and the sharp, they danced together perfectly. Eating those pickles was like opening a time capsule, allowing us to taste the bright sunshine and warmth of summer right in the dark, freezing heart of January. And finally, we arrive at the most sacred, intimate ritual of our past, a tradition that perfectly encapsulates the soul of our generation. Let us remember drinking tea through a lump of sugar. In the quiet evenings, the family would gather around the table. Mother would pour incredibly strong, dark, unsweetened black tea from a beautiful porcelain teapot into glass cups held by nettle holders, or simply into our favorite ceramic mugs. Instead of stirring loose sugar into the water, we used hard, irregular lumps of refined white sugar. You would take a piece of the rock-hard sugar, place it delicately between your front teeth, and take a slow, careful sip of the scalding, bitter tea right through the sugar lump. The hot tea would instantly begin to melt the sugar against your tongue, sweetening the dark liquid perfectly as it washed over your palate. This slow, deliberate way of drinking forced us to sit quietly, to savor the warmth, and to look into the eyes of our family members across the table. It was not just a way to drink tea, it was a way to share time, love, and a profound sense of belonging. My dear friends, as we look back at these 20 humble foods, it becomes beautifully clear that our nostalgia is not really about the bread, the sugar, or the cheap sausages. We are not grieving the loss of an empty fridge. What we truly miss with all our hearts is the undeniable warmth of that era. We miss our youth, our boundless energy, and the magical feeling that time stretched endlessly before us. We miss the deep, unbreakable connections we shared, sitting in those cramped kitchens, where a single piece of fried macaroni or a shared paper cone of sunflower seeds meant more than 1,000 words of love. We miss a world where simplicity was not a burden, but a canvas for our joy. If these memories have warmed your soul today, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video to help keep our precious history alive. And now, I would love to hear from you. Which of these simple foods was your absolute favorite when you were growing up? And who did you share it with? Please, write your personal story in the comments below. Let us continue this beautiful conversation together.